Philip Haberman, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Adam. Nice to meet you.
It's great to have you with us. For anyone listening who doesn't know Philip, which I can't imagine there are many forensic accountants who don't, but he was Arbitration Expert Witness of the Year 7 times by Who's Who Legal.
That's right.
Leader of the EY Forensic Disputes team for near enough 11 years.
11 years, yes.
And then co-founder of, at the time, the UK's largest forensic boutique, Haberman Ilett.
Yes.
Prior to a successful exit to Kroll at the end of 2020.
That's right.
It's great to have you with us, so thank you for spending a bit of time.
Thank you for having me.
I wanted to go back to the start, if possible. How you came to be a forensic accountant.
Okay. It's one of those things that had no pattern to it. So I trained with Peat Marwick, as it then was, which had the advantage of giving a pretty broad experience of all sorts of things. I think it was the last of the big firms not to push people into separating audit, tax and anything else. So I did a bit of everything for quite a while. And through various things that had happened, I found myself doing a particular project at the end of the 1980s. And I can remember it very clearly because I had a call from the then London office senior partner just before Christmas 1989, and he said to me, we've decided to set up this department to be called to do sort of expert witness and other sorts of work. Would you like to be the senior manager? And that was it. That was the conversation. So I said, well, perhaps can I do a little bit of research and find out what's involved? He said, certainly. He said, here's the business plan for what's being proposed. And so on the 1st of January 1990, I found myself as the first senior manager of the newest department of Peat Marwick. Our staff comprised me, a secondee from Australia, and a secretary, and we had half a partner because Michael Renshaw at the time was chairman of the Accounting Standards Committee. And was often asked to be an expert witness because of that. But he was spending so much of his time at the Institute that we only had half of his time. That's how we started. And it turned out to be, as far as I was concerned, I was a square peg and I'd found my square hole. I couldn't believe that people would actually pay me to have a view. The one thing that I always disliked about working as an accountant was too often you were setting things out for other people to have a view, but you were not expected to have a view yourself. And suddenly there I was, people wanted me to have a view, and they were going to be paying fees for it. And I took to it like a duck to water. It was just pure luck to have found myself in that position where I was available to do it. A few people said to me, we think this will suit you, and they were absolutely right. So it really did, and it took off from there. I mean, we caught the beginning of a wave, and I think we were the fastest growing unit in what became in KPMG for several years in succession. The growth just went up and up and up. It was fantastic.
And it's now, I think, one of the most interesting areas of accounting, and we see more and more every year newly qualified ACAs, ACCAs coming out of audit and tax, wanting to go into forensic accounting.
Well, I think it's an interesting area because so the trite things. Every job you do is different. Every engagement is different. Well, that's true in lots of things, but you are really expected to make a decision, to have a view, and there's somebody on the other side who's probably going to have the opposite view. So you're going to have to argue about it. And I think it's that attracts certain people who are happy to argue. I enjoyed it because I enjoyed the arguments. And I was always conscious that there would be somebody like me on the other side trying to argue the opposite. And so you knew when you started something, you were looking not just for the good points, but you had to be aware of the weaknesses and had to be aware of where somebody else might be coming from. And then there was the fun of being cross-examined, which is just really entertaining if you like that sort of thing.
And you, of course, you've been cross-examined 69 times?
69 times in total, yes.
Which, an incredible career. What do you think makes a good forensic accountant?
I think it's being prepared to recognise that there are two sides and to see things from both sides. And you find it's one of the things that mediators are always told is when you sit down with the parties in the first place, each one has been focusing on the good points in its case. And what a mediator does is get them to focus on the good points in the other side's case, and hence get them to be realistic. And I think that's what you need to be able to do as a forensic accountant. You have to be able to see both sides because you need to anticipate what the other side are going to come up with. Otherwise, you're really not going to do a very good job. You're just going to be parroting what your side wants you to parrot. And you may well come out with something that's unrealistic in the end, particularly if your client loses. And that's one of the things I've found really interesting over time, is the number of times in litigation and arbitration where the expert for the respondent or the defendant comes up with an answer of 0. I can pretty well say 0 is, I think it's once been the right answer. But genuinely, it's never the right answer, because if it was the right answer, why are the parties arguing about this in the first place? You know, if you were successful in your case, but you're not entitled to any damages, why have you been pursuing it? So the reality is 0 is never the right answer. And I think a good forensic accountant is somebody who will stand up to their own client. And if their client wants them to say 0, will say, well, no, that cannot be right. For all sorts of reasons, and in lots of cases you can show various reasons why it doesn't make sense. But you have to be able to be sensible and realistic. So I think a good forensic accountant can see both sides, can also see both the detail and the big picture. So one of the things I've noticed is people come up with arguments that make perfect sense from the bottom up. From looking at the detail, they can argue and it all makes complete sense. But then when you look at the big picture, you think, hang on a minute, this company that's made no profit at all for the last 20 years is suddenly going to be the world's most profitable business in this area. I mean, come on, it just doesn't make sense. So doing the job well means making sense at the detailed level and at the overview level. And the ideal is to be able to do both. So one of the partners I worked with at KPMG, I learned this from him. He was working on a case where they were arguing about whether a firm had been negligent, and he was working for the institute and on an inquiry. And the issue he came upon was, should he be criticising all of the individuals on a team or just the partner? And he drafted a report, and he had 2 versions of the conclusion. And I had no idea what the case was about. He hadn't shown it to me at all. But he said to me, have a quick read of the report, and I've got 2 versions of the conclusion, and tell me which one you think works better. And one of them was a summary of conclusions, which basically took the conclusions paragraph from each section and put them together, and that was the summary. Perfect. The other one told the story in a completely different way. Instead of working from the detail upwards, it told the story from the overview. And the light bulb went on. I thought, this is just fantastic. This is the way to describe things. So if you can make sense of the detail and get that to support your case, and then you can show that the overview makes sense and supports your case, then you're doing a much, much better job.
I imagine it's quite a rare skill set to find. I mean, you've been someone that's hired a lot of people throughout your career.
Yes.
When you've interviewed prospective candidates, how often were you coming across people that you genuinely thought had the capacity to go on and do that?
I think the truth is you build that up over time. You're not going to find that in somebody who's being recruited relatively soon after qualifying. that's the sort of thing that you build up over a career. And it's actually something you can be taught as well. So you can build that through experience. I think when hiring people, particularly in a small firm, the most important thing is that people have a bit of personality and they can be trusted. Because whereas in a large firm, if people are not so good, they can hide. I mean, everybody knows in big firms there are always people hiding away who probably shouldn't still be there, but the firm hasn't quite worked out how to persuade them to leave. In a small firm, that doesn't happen. So in a small firm, you really need to be able to trust the people that you recruit, and recruiting the right people is a really important thing to do. And if those people have a bit of oomph to them, it makes a real difference. So certainly at Haberman Ilett, we always looked for people who had a bit of personality, could look after themselves, and that we felt we could trust. And my colleagues who were really, really good at recruiting, much better than me, I tend to trust everybody. They were much better than me, and they picked up some really, really good candidates.
Can we go back to maybe the moment you and Frank Ilett decided to start the firm?
Yes.
Because that must have been, for senior partners from the Big Four, to go off on your own at that stage in your life, it must have been, I imagine, really exciting, but also, was it perhaps quite scary?
Well, it's quite interesting, actually, because I thought about it afterwards and thought about what was going on in the way I was thinking. And what happened was about 2 or 3 years before that, I'd been approached by someone from overseas to set up their London office. And I was approached by a headhunter, and I met the then senior partner, as it happens, abroad, because I happened to be going to the right place. So we had breakfast together, which was really nice. And I came back at the end of it, and I said, well, really what they want me to do is to set up their London office, because in London nobody's heard of them. They're not really bringing any great systems or anything particularly to the party. Well, if I wanted to do that, I could do it myself. But what it was is it planted a seed in the back of my mind, I think, that said somebody outside has confidence that you could do this. So then fast forward a couple of years, and I'd had a particularly bad week. I had turned away 3 big assignments because of conflicts of interest. And I was just so cheesed off. Talking to one of my partners at EY, and he said to me, I was having a drink with Frank last night. You know Frank Ilett, don't you? And I said, well, not really, but he said, well, he was complaining about the same thing. You ought to complain to each other. He put us together. We had an all-afternoon lunch, at the end of which we decided we would do this.
Wow.
And it was based on, so I was at a point where I was getting close to the required retirement date for EY, which was 60. So I was 57. Frank was a bit younger than me, but he'd had a couple of clients had said to him, you really ought to just leave and set up by yourself. And I think it was the combination of the two of us thinking the same thing. We decided at the end of the afternoon, we said, okay, we'll do this. We had nothing in writing. We trusted each other. There was nothing in writing, nothing between us. I gave in my notice at EY. He gave in his notice at Deloitte's. And a few months later, we were set up and running. And the really interesting thing, I think, and a lot of lawyers that I've told the story to thought, this is the most bizarre thing to do, to do this without having anything in writing at all. But essentially, it wasn't very high risk. My wife, when I explained to my wife what I was going to do, she said to me, well, what's the downside? And it made me stop and think, because somebody always needs to ask you difficult questions. And I said, well, I can see the people who come to work with me, they'll be okay because they'll be able to go off and work with someone else. We'll have paid out some money, would have had to rent some premises, buy some computers, do a bit of work. But let's say after 18 months or 2 years, I decide this is not the world for me, and we close down. Well, I'd have probably earned some fees. So I reckon that I'll probably break even. So I'll have worked for 18 months for nothing. And she said, well, there's no real downside then, is there? And that made an enormous difference, because I went into it completely positively, thinking to myself, there is no downside. Whatever happens, it'll be fine. And it turned out that it was. But through luck. And we sort of opened our doors at the beginning of September and did very little work for the first 2 months. And then I got a phone call in October from somebody I knew at KPMG who said to me, we've got a client with a transaction dispute and we have to pull out because we have a conflict. And they knew we would have to pull out if it became a formal dispute. So they want us to suggest some alternatives. He said, would you be willing to be suggested? And you had to stop me from being too eager. And I said, well, yes, of course. So he arranged for the CFO from this US company to come over to London and to meet 3 potential alternatives. One was from one of the firms just outside the Big Four. One was me, and one was from somebody who ran a small business by herself. We got the job. Not only did we get the job, but the client turned out to be a wonderful client. So when we'd been sort of discussing how to be billed, and eventually we agreed on straight hourly rates, I said to him, look, I need to send you a bill, because as you know, we're relatively new, and we need the cash flow. And he said, not a problem. He said, if you send me the bill, I'll be in London next week. First thing Monday morning, I will put through the payment. So we got a large bill paid before Christmas. And from that moment onwards, we were cash flow positive. And so it's the combination of luck. The luck of getting together with Frank, somebody phoning me up, we got the job, and it turned out to be a great client. Yeah. And anybody who says luck isn't involved is just pretending.
Well, there's that. What golfer was it? Was it Gary Player? Maybe the
yes,
around,
he's
the
the one who's
work, the luckier I get.
Yes, he's the one who's most famous for it.
So, like you say, it was a fortuitous set of events, but ones that you had spent a career,
and you put yourself in a position to take advantage of them.
Exactly. Yeah. I dug out an interview actually with Frank from 2018.
Okay.
And I thought this was really great because I thought this really summarised certainly my experience externally of working with Haberman Ilett and my experience with the firm. Frank said, we both have a very similar approach in that we keep things as simple as possible. We don't over-engineer anything. We keep our communications simple. We keep our financial system simple. Even our bonus system for our staff are kept simple. It's very easy to run the firm and provide clients with the service they expect and need because we keep things nice and simple, and it's been great fun too. The other thing we wanted to do was create a firm where we can provide the best for everybody, the best service for our clients and staff who have been handpicked to do that, and to provide the best environment for our staff as well. We wanted to create an environment where nobody wanted to leave, and so far, no one has left to go to another competitor in the same country. Great summary, I think. 2 guys that have a very similar mindset.
Well, that's it. I mean, the simplicity is the great thing, because we got so used to large firms making everything really elaborate. The systems were complicated. You had so many things you had to do, and we just thought we need to cut that out. And together with the first members of our team, who were Liz Perks and Vicky Wall, we sat down with the intention of taking the best things from the Big Four firms and leaving behind all the worst things. So, I mean, our systems, we managed to find a database provider who said, well, we can write you a really simple system. We wanted a contact system, nothing more. And he said, well, we can do that for you. He said, then we could add a timesheet system onto it. Before we knew where we were, after a couple of years, we had achieved the holy grail that large companies spend millions of pounds trying to achieve, single data entry. Because we had just one system. You put the client details in, and it then got picked up in the project. You put your time in, it got picked up. It got picked up into the system for calculating the billing. We then had a really simple accounting system, and that was it. We didn't need anything else. And so, whereas in large firms you always had these requests for information, give us more information, we need to know this, we need to know that, we didn't have to do that. In fact, we were doing the opposite. We were saying, we can tell you this. So we were giving useful information to ourselves. So when someone went to an event or to meet a firm that they didn't really know very well, we could give them a single piece of paper. By the way, we know these 20 people there. These are the people who know them. We've worked with them twice in the last couple of years. They came to us with another opportunity which we didn't get. You know everything you need to know to have a conversation. And it was all out of a really, really simple system. Mm. And the simplicity makes a lot of difference.
What were some of the challenges maybe of obviously you've been a senior partner in a Big Four already, so you'd already built your own book of business. You had really the marketing function, I suppose, was you, and you had contacts. But were there any challenges that you and Frank maybe didn't expect, or things that surprised you in terms of being business owners and running a firm in entirety?
It's a good question. I don't think there were really, surprisingly enough, mainly because to a large extent things ran themselves. I mean, there was a moment when one of our admin team, I'd had job sharing secretaries at EY, and when I said I was leaving, they said, "Can we come with you? Can we be your office manager?" Which is what happened. And one of the two decided to do a CIPD course, so she would do a bit more work on the HR side. And she came and talked to me one day and said, "We've just been learning about KPIs. What KPIs do you use for the firm?" And I said, "Well, I've only got two." I said, "One is, how much cash do we have in the bank? And the other one is, when I walk around the office, does everyone look busy?" And literally, those were the KPIs. And I think I realised that when things are going well, professional staff don't need very much management. If things are going badly, they need more management. And I don't think I'd be very good at doing that. But when things are going well, all they need is encouragement. And that's something I'm really good at. Encouraging people is great. As long as things are not going badly, I'm very comfortable.
Were there any landmark cases or projects as you were getting the firm up and running? Obviously, you've already mentioned the first project,
yes,
with a, well-timely paying clients, and that. But were there anything that really either put Haberman Ilett on the map in terms of the work you were doing, or maybe anything you thought internally, this is really the use case of us as a firm, this is a really great project for the type of work we want to do?
I don't think there were any in particular, partly because by then things had moved on. It was mostly international arbitration. And the arbitration world, the cases tend to be quite confidential. But word gets around. Word gets around as to who's doing a good job and who isn't, who's reliable and who isn't. So actually, that's all you can do, really. You can't make much publicity out of a case. And you're just relying on other people spreading the word. I mean, I did have a couple of really interesting cases. One very large case where I was acting for a respondent state who had behaved very badly, and the claimant was claiming $2.8 billion, which was ridiculous. And we came up with a much more sensible figure, not zero, much more sensible figure. And the reason why I remember the case was because it had the longest award section on damages that I'd ever seen. The section of the award on damages was 180 pages long. And it was written by somebody I'd not come across before, not an English arbitrator. And he went systematically through each of the individual, not just the big headings, but each of the individual subheadings, went through each one. He said, claimant's expert says this, respondent's expert says that, and this is why we agree with the respondent's expert. For all 180 pages. Every single point he agreed with us.
Wow.
And that was the point where it really emphasized how if you go over the top, you can push the tribunal away. You know, lots of the points, there were good and bad points, but they agreed with us on absolutely everything. And I think that was a sign of how far over the top the claimant's expert had gone. And I think what happens from a case like that is word gets around, because that arbitrator will have told other people. There were two others on the panel as well. They would have mentioned, things would have been mentioned. I don't know what, but things would have been mentioned. And that's really the key to being successful. Certainly in the world of arbitration, it's being known and being reasonable. Recognizing that the arbitrator is the one who's got to make the difficult decision. So if you can give the arbitrator what they need to make their decision, then you're really achieving something. I learnt that at a much earlier stage when watching barristers in court. So watching counsel say things which were completely obvious. And I was talking to a solicitor about this. I said, I don't really understand. Why is he telling the judge these things which are just completely obvious? And he said, well, what he's doing is he's giving the judge a roadmap for his judgment to be able to give the decision we want. So he establishes these points which are obvious, and then they're on the route to getting him to the decision we want him to reach. Wow. And I'd not quite appreciated that that's what counsel are doing particularly when they're summarising and they're arguing a case. They're not just arguing, but they're giving the judge his decision in a slightly different form, but making it really easy for him to do. And I realise that's what we have to do as experts. If we want a tribunal to agree with us, we have to give them the route that helps them to agree with us.
Brilliant. There's another, speaking of you learning from barristers, going the other way, something that I think for me at least, I never used to see anyone other than Haberman Ilett offering this. You used to go into law firms and offer training.
Yes.
On accounts.
Yes.
These days, I think the kids would call that guerrilla marketing, thinking outside the box. But what a brilliant way as well to continue to build your network.
Yes.
And for you to learn from them to learn from you, that kind of symbiotic relationship.
Well, I think it's a reflection of the fact that an expert witness, it's a very, very strange role. So most people who are experts in a professional area spend most of their career talking to other people who are experts in that area. Accountants talk to financial people. Engineers talk to construction people. They're all talking to people who understand the same language. And so we all use jargon all the time. But what makes a good expert witness is that person has to be prepared to untangle their jargon and make it understandable to people who are not experts, i.e. the lawyers who are on the tribunal, the lawyers who are arguing the case. So an expert witness has to undermine his own profession, in effect. He's got to try and make his own profession simpler and put it into terms that other people will understand. So from our point of view, it was really good training for our staff to be able to say, look, go and explain this to some lawyers. If you can explain it to people, you're well on the way to being a good expert witness. So yes, it was guerrilla marketing. And we weren't the first by any means. Lots of others have done it. But it was very good for giving people the opportunity to have their say, to have the chance to stand up in front of a group of people, which is a good thing to do, but also to be able to explain technical things to non-technical people. That's one of the critical things you have to be able to do to be a good expert witness, as opposed to a good expert.
That probably feeds into another topic I wanted to talk to you about, which was, when I look back, I think Haberman Ilett had a reputation for bringing through some really brilliant people. You and your team, you and Frank originally, and obviously as the team grew, you brought through many people now who are at the forefront of the profession. If you look around at other firms.
It's lovely to see. It's really good to see.
But there must have been a secret sauce somewhere along the way, because there's not many other firms that can look at that amount of people coming through their ranks.
I think some of it is to do with, well, a lot is to do with recruiting, getting the right people in the first place, giving them the right encouragement, and giving them plenty of opportunity. So one of the things we used to do is I had a little talk that I would give to people on their first day. And some of these often people who are newly qualified, it's the first time they'd stepped outside the firm they were at. And I used to tell them things like, from day one, we expect you to network. Usually met with a blank look. So, but now understand what I mean. What I don't mean, I'm expecting you to become best friends with a partner from Herbert Smith. No. What I want you to do is to become business friends with your equivalents at the law firms that you're working with. Because we all benefit from this. What will happen is, as your career develops, their career will develop. So just at the point when you are expected to be able to bring work in, your business friends will be in a position to deliver work to you. So it's a benefit to you wherever you go. Your network goes with you. It's a benefit for us for as long as you're here. That's absolutely fine. But it's also a benefit to you personally. And people took it to heart. And I would say pretty well everybody we recruited recognized, yes, I am expected to network. And they would do that. And networking builds up, does much more for you as an individual, because it gives you a lot more confidence, a lot more perspective on what's going on outside, and recognizing other people have difficult jobs to do. So if you're taking up time from a lawyer, you're stopping them from going to see their prospective clients. So recognize they're doing you a favor, but don't take up too much of their time. But keep in touch, be business friends, give them support, and just be nice to them. That's all you have to do. Something someone said to me a long time ago, and I don't remember who it was. People like to work with people they like. And it's absolutely true.
Yep.
So as you spread your network, you get a lot of people that you know and who like you. Suddenly, work will come into you. And for everyone, it's a really, really nice moment when the first time that happens, and particularly for somebody relatively junior, someone phones them up and says, could you help on this case? And the joy on their face when that happens is wonderful. And I think it's the sharing in the positives. So I don't believe in taking credit for other people's work. It's quite noticeable. You see how people behave in different areas. My favourite one looking at is Formula One. So yeah, I find it really noticeable how whenever Lewis Hamilton is interviewed, the first thing he says is, the team did a great job. He said, actually, I didn't do a very good job, but the team did a great job. It's always praise the team and take responsibility for the things that go wrong. And for a long time, and he's improved recently, Max Verstappen was the opposite. He always took credit for the good things, and if something went wrong, it was because of the car, which is blaming the team. But more recently, he's moved away from that. And I think it's really interesting to see, because to me, it's if you want to encourage people, you have to give them the credit. So any time I had a case that went well, it was always because actually the team helped me to put together a really good report. And I always described my job of being cross-examined as being a bit like the captain of a team going into a tie break.
Mm.
The team's done all the work to get me to this point. It's my job not to let them down.
It's a great analogy. The networking piece was something I remember all the people I recruited at Haberman through the years, when we'd catch up on calls 6 months into the job, how are you getting on? It was always something that was commented on.
Yeah.
It was such a different approach.
Yes.
And even today, I had dinner with a client of mine, a partner at a firm, a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying to me, I just interviewed a director from a competing firm, and I was amazed. He was telling me in the interview that at his firm, even at director level, he's very much not encouraged to business develop.
Yeah.
You know, that's seen as the partner's job, and that's got to be one of the hardest transitions in your profession to make, right?
Yeah.
From being technically astute to being able to consistently deliver revenue.
Yes.
And the longer you put that transition off, surely the harder it becomes.
Well, but that's right. I mean, because I was thinking about this beforehand and thinking, well, the reality is you can't just make a switch, because you can't suddenly switch from being I'm a doer to I'm now a business developer. You have to do it all the way through. You do it from a very early stage. And to begin with, it feels really strange. And often you feel, I'm not quite sure what I should be doing. And that was why we said to people, don't worry about what you're doing. Just be nice to people. And it was amazing how it worked and how it then caught on. Because then everyone gets the idea, this is what you're trying to do. As you say, I can remember an occasion where we had somebody who joined us from one of the big four firms, and he came with me to a client meeting to talk about something. After the meeting, he said to me, that's the first client meeting I've been to. Now, he was 2 or 3 years post-qualified.
Wow.
And I thought, isn't that bizarre? I mean, if you can, and if it's a small case and you can't justify it, it's a bit more difficult. But generally speaking, you can always justify taking the assistant. I mean, if we had a case that went to trial, to court, I would tell and I used to do this at EY, I would tell the whole team, this is where I am. I'm going to be giving evidence. It would be okay for a couple of people to come in and watch if you want to. My secretary came one day. I said, be aware of one thing. I said, I will ignore you. I won't even know that you're there. But if you want to see what happens at the end of a case and what it leads to, come and see. And in every arbitration hearing, we would always have all the members of the team there. Even if they're just sitting at the back, and we would tell the client, you're not paying for them. That's for our benefit, not for your benefit. Because then they can see this is what, all the work that they've done, this is what it leads to. And if you can see what it leads to, you will do the job better. But but particularly with business development, the reality is you can't just switch. I don't think many people could switch. You have to do it gradually. And gradually, it builds up until it becomes much less effort. I mean, I was a bit different because I was starting in forensic when it was a new idea, and I was a senior manager. So to begin with, I used to go along to events, these one-day conferences and that sort of thing. And at the end of the day, I think, what a waste of time. I sat next to somebody who wasn't very interesting or who wasn't very useful or who turned out not to be of any relevance to what I was doing. Oh, dear me. But I kept doing it. And it must have been after about 4 or 5 years of doing this, I can remember the occasion. I went to a one-day conference that happened to be in Herbert Smith's offices. And lunch was a buffet lunch. And I was standing not far from the lunch table chatting to somebody. And during the course of lunchtime, 12 people came and talked to us. And I realised I knew most of the 12. And if I didn't, one of the others introduced me to them as somebody they knew. And suddenly I realised I knew people. Up to that point, I'd felt like Sisyphus pushing the rock up the mountain and never getting anywhere. And suddenly my rock had reached the top of the mountain. And then, of course, it rolls down the other side and it just gets bigger. And the network just grew and grew without any effort at all. Just because now that I knew people, people would introduce me to other people. And if I went to things, I would look for an opportunity to say something. So I find it surprising how few people go to the LCIA symposiums at Tilney Hall. And the great thing about those is you can say something. I mean, the first time I went to one, there are lots of questions raised. You can decide what you want to, if you've got something you want to raise. And I wasn't quite sure about this, but I sort of tentatively stuck up a hand, and somebody stuck a microphone in it with a coloured foam pad on the top. And after a couple of minutes, the person who was chairing that session said, chap with the blue microphone. Oh, that's me. I was able to stand up, just give my name, because that's the routine, and say something. But everybody in the room then recognises, oh, you're X, you've said something. A couple of people came up to me at the next break and said, that was a really interesting point. My network was expanding. And so you can do all sorts of things to expand, but the only way you achieve it is by talking to people and by being seen. Being seen makes a big difference.
Committing time as well, and
yes.
realising that these things aren't overnight. It's probably one of the
Yeah.
few areas our professions kind of cross over, I suppose,
Yes.
in that it's the nature of business development, isn't it? You can't expect the first time you make a call to someone or meet them at a conference, they turn around and give you the biggest piece of work on their desk. But hopefully after several years, and
Yes.
like you say, you build the credibility.
Yeah.
And they get to know that you're a good person with the right intentions, and then they get that bit of work where maybe they think, you know what, I'll call them, see what they're like. And,
Yes.
And then the good delivery comes in, and providing it is good, it goes on, doesn't it?
That's exactly right. I think again, I've heard these things told to me before in sort of business development training, that before somebody has to have encountered you 6 times before they'll buy from you. And those 6 times don't have to be all face-to-face. They can be a phone call, they can be an email. But exactly as you say, you have to have a relationship of some sort. And once you have a little bit of a relationship, that's when they're in a position to buy from you. When we started up as Haberman Ilett, because we didn't have very many staff, we decided we needed to be honest. So a couple of times we had calls, somebody would call up and say, could you take on such and such a case? I say, well, what's the timing? Oh, well, we'll need a report in 4 weeks. I say, well, no, we can't. We don't have the capacity to take it on. And I don't want to take it on and not do a good job for you. So a couple of times we would turn things away. And I think that was recognised outside as being, well, actually you're genuine. When you say you want to do a good job, you're genuinely wanting to do a good job because you're prepared to turn it away if you don't think you can. I think that helped us a lot. Not at the time. It didn't feel like it was helping. But I think in reality it really did.
It's credibility, isn't it? Because how many firms that have maybe unrealistic budgets or a bit behind for the year would just go, we can't do it, but we really need the money, so let's take it and we'll fudge it. And
well, that was exactly the thing. So at a Big Four firm, you never said no. Even if you weren't quite sure what you were going to do, you'd say yes. You would never say no. It's just, that was the way it worked, because there are so many things you couldn't do because of conflicts and so on, that you would never turn away an opportunity. And it was very different because we had limited resources. If we were all busy, unfortunately we can't take on something else. We're all busy. Slightly different topic. When we first started the firm, I had some signs of success.
Okay.
One of them was the first time I sent out a bill. One of them was the first time I got a bill paid. It wasn't the same one. But one of them was the first time I said no to something just because I didn't fancy the idea. No good reason at all. And that was a wonderful moment because of not feeling under pressure. As you say, you get put under pressure by a firm to always say yes and to take everything on and do more than you really have the capacity to do. Whereas, actually, if you take a slightly more sensible approach and say, hold on a minute, if we don't have the capacity to do it, let's face up to it. Let's just do what we want to do. And that gives a message also to the staff, creates a message for the team. We're not going to put ourselves under unrealistic pressure. We don't need to. We're going to do absolutely fine as we are, and we're all in this together. The point that Frank made about the bonus scheme, that was a very important one. We had a discussion the first year. We've made more money than we thought we would. So what are we going to do? We'll pay a bonus to the staff. And we were all a bit unsure, how should we do this? And I was very strongly in favour of something that's equal for everybody. So we paid a bonus of a percentage of earnings, because people who had joined us during the year, a percentage of people's earnings, but the same percentage for everyone. And I think it really did contribute to the idea that we're a team and to try and avoid internal competition. We are a team because we're too small to be competing with each other. We're a team. Let's behave as a team. I think it worked.
Fabulous. There's one area I would like to pick your brains, if it's okay, because I think this is probably the number one challenge as a recruiter I'm seeing in the forensic world at the moment. And this is around people at maybe the experienced senior manager come onto director level, getting their first expert appointment.
Yes.
It seems to be the biggest challenge in the industry. We've obviously, now, like any industry, you've always got the people at the very top, the most well-known, like you and many of the partners at Haberman Ilett were, or still are today. Every firm has its breadwinners.
Yes.
But the industry needs to support the next generation of experts coming through. And a lot of people at the level I mentioned are struggling to get that first appointment, whether it be internal firm policies or just more often than not, getting the trust of the client to give them that. Any thoughts on maybe either how you used to encourage that at Haberman Ilett, or just any strategies if you were at that level today that you might employ?
Well, the best strategy is to work for somebody who will give you the opportunity. It sounds silly, but that's the truth, because the problem is that most people deep down suffer from a little bit of insecurity. So they're not quite sure. They need to feel that they're the important person. So the partners all want to take on the cases and don't want to pass things on to a senior manager. But unless the partner is going to say the right thing, the senior manager is not going to get the opportunity. So, and it was the same also, not just with senior managers, but with more junior partners. So I went through a phase of thinking about this and came to the conclusion of what I should do. And the first time I did it, it was really difficult. Somebody phoned me up to ask me to take on the role of expert in a case. And I said, well, yes. I said, we could do that. I said, but actually it's not for me. I said, X, who's one of my colleagues, will do a better job than me. And the client said, but we're used to you. We would like you to do it. I said, well, no, trust me. They'll do a better job than I will. And that's how far I had to go to get them to accept it. Because everyone's conservative. They want to stick with the people they know. So I'd said, well, no, X will do this job better than me. And if they need to get my advice, they always can. But you can trust them. And the reality is, I think it's, for a senior manager, it's the partners at their firm have to trust them and have to tell the clients that they trust them in order for the clients to have trust in them. So the only thing you can do is work for the right people. It's very hard to do, but it's easier to have the conversation with them and say, you need to say to somebody, X will do this job very well. And it's not saying, you're not saying I'm no good. You're just saying X will do this particular engagement better than me. It may be because they've got more time available. Maybe for all sorts of other reasons. You can justify it to yourself, but you have to bring yourself to do that, to give opportunities to others. again, back to the luck. I had the great fortune of working with some partners who would look to give me every opportunity. So Michael Renshaw in particular was a brilliant chairman. He could chair anything. But his attitude to meetings was, we go to the meeting together and I want you to do the talking. Mm. So it was always, in effect, trying to get the clients to have more confidence in me. And that's really what you need. You need the opportunities to be doing the talking. And then something will come along and a client will say, well, yeah, okay, we're happy with you. Sometimes it'll be after the case has started. And then if you can structure it carefully enough, you can make sure that the partner's not available to go to all the meetings. So the senior manager runs the meetings, and then before you know where you are, the client has complete confidence in the senior manager and recognises they don't really need the partner. And that's when you get your opportunity. It's hard to do, but it doesn't start with persuading the clients. It starts with persuading people internally.
Having a champion in your firm that's going to back you.
Yeah. Or the partners generally being prepared to do that and give you those opportunities.
Question tied to this that I'd be interested to get your thoughts on is another bit of feedback or question I've had from people at that level, wondering, is it worth me really hyper specializing in today's market? Is it worth me would I get more opportunities to be an expert if I became the go-to person for intellectual property disputes or post-deal M&A? Does that offer any help, or do you think it's still beneficial to be not a generalist, but to have a broad exposure to different cases?
My personal view is that having a broad exposure is better because you could just bring a little bit more to the role. You won't get caught out if somebody asks a question which is not quite on the topic that you were dealing with. I had one case. It was a transaction dispute, but it was quite a small dispute, but it had a very eminent panel. One of whom was somebody who's well known for feeling that he's the most intelligent person in the room. And he unfortunately got the wrong end of the stick on something. And my client was struggling with how on earth are we going to get him on the right track. And eventually, after a discussion, they agreed what we would do. So the next morning was my evidence was first. And it started off with the counsel on my side saying to me, Mr. Haberman, could you explain to the tribunal how this works? I then spent 20 minutes unscripted explaining to the tribunal the intricacies of how a sale and purchase agreement works, why things are done in particular ways and which bits interact with which other bits. I was told that throughout this time, not only was my client nodding vigorously, but so were the people on the other side, because they were also afraid the tribunal were getting the wrong end of the stick. And at the end of it, we got them back onto the right track. But I couldn't have done that if I hadn't been involved in a number of deals earlier, understood how the deals work, why they work the way they do, and had some wider experience. I think that's the thing. You don't know when it's going to be needed, but sometime it will be. So even if you do specialise, it shouldn't be more than a proportion of the work that you do. You know, a sort of, not so much a specialisation, say I sort of major in something, but I do lots of other things too. It's better to keep that balance. That would be my personal advice.
I think it's brilliant advice. It's been brilliant talking to you. Thank you so much. Before we started recording, you were talking about a little bit of mentorship that you're doing now.
Yes.
And obviously you do have a new role now, that although you've stepped away from being an expert, you still are very much involved in the industry.
Yes.
Obviously we will include your website and things in the comments, but maybe just as a closing, you give a little bit of an overview around the work you're doing today and who might benefit from getting in contact. Okay.
So I've been doing a little bit of mentoring that started off. I was approached by one of your competitors who also did some work with us when we were Haberman Ilett, and asked me, had placed somebody as a new partner at a firm where they hadn't recruited partners from outside before. And of course, he'd not been a partner before. It was a medium-sized firm. And simply said, would you be prepared to have a chat with him? And so we've met up a few times, and I find it quite interesting. And I realised that also in the past, although I came through in an era where you didn't have something as formal as a mentor, there were people I could talk to. And if I wasn't sure about something, or I had some, even if it was an uncertainty not related to work, I realised you need someone to talk to bounce things off. And so I've been happy to do that. And I'm happy to do that. It's not something I'm going to do all the time, but but I'll happily talk to a few people at a time, just about careers generally and general advice. I'm also sitting occasionally as an arbitrator. I'm doing expert determinations. The one thing I won't do is be an expert witness. I don't want to do that amount of work anymore. So if other people do all the work and present it to me, I'm then happy to make decisions. And that's something I've always been willing to do, is to make decisions. And I think it's an important thing during the course of a career. You have to be able to make decisions. And sometimes even recognise that not making a decision is a decision in itself. So when I got itchy feet at a firm and thought maybe I need to move and decided not to, I felt much better for it, because then I was staying for a positive reason, because I decided to stay, not for the negative reason that I hadn't bothered to look around. So very much I'm a believer in have decisions, make decisions, live with the consequences, and just move on to the next one.
Fabulous. What a great closing bit of advice. Philip, thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome. It was nice to talk to you.